Picture this: a powerhouse German automaker. The company that gave us the people's car secretly rigs millions of its vehicles. They use clever software that fools emissions tests, all while claiming their cars are eco-friendly. But in reality, these cars are spewing toxic fumes into the air, way over the legal limit. For years, this deception goes completely undetected, boosting sales and making the company billions. But then in 2015, the truth explodes. It triggers the biggest corporate scandal in automotive history. We're talking billions of dollars in fines, ruined reputations, and a massive wake-up call about corporate greed. This is Dieselgate, the story of how Volkswagen poisoned the planet and exposed the dark underbelly of big business. Buckle up, because this story of deception and downfall will keep you riveted. And by the end, you'll see how everyday pressures can turn good people into enablers of something truly terrible. To really understand how Dieselgate happened, we have to rewind to the early 2000s. Volkswagen was on a mission to dominate the global auto market. Founded way back in 1937, VW had grown into a giant, owning brands like Audi, Porsche, and Bentley. But there was one market they just couldn't crack: the US diesel market. Americans loved their gas guzzlers, and really strict emissions rules from the EPA made selling diesel cars incredibly difficult. Now, diesels were super popular in Europe because they were fuel efficient. But they had a dirty secret. They emitted high levels of nitrogen oxides, or NOx. That's the nasty stuff that causes smog, acid rain, and serious respiratory problems. This is where Ferdinand Piëch enters the story. As VW's chairman and grandson of the founder of Porsche, Piëch was an engineering genius with a famously tyrannical leadership style. He was obsessed with cracking the US market and pushed his teams to develop clean diesel technology. His goal was to sell 800,000 diesel cars in the US every single year by 2018. When Martin Winterkorn became CEO in 2007, he inherited this immense pressure. Winterkorn was a detail-obsessed engineer who set an even more aggressive target: make Volkswagen the world's largest automaker by 2018, surpassing Toyota. The problem was, meeting those tough US emissions standards for NOx was nearly impossible without sacrificing performance or fuel economy, the very things that made diesel cars attractive. VW's engineers tried different solutions, but the most effective ones were too expensive and bulky for their smaller cars, like the Golf and the Jetta. Deadlines were looming for the 2009 model year, and in Volkswagen's hyper-sure culture, failure simply was not an option. And that's when the cheating began. Sometime around 2006, deep inside Volkswagen's headquarters in Wolfsburg, Germany, a team of engineers developed what we now call a defeat device. This wasn't a physical part, but a piece of software hidden in the car's engine control unit. This software was brilliant in its deception. It could detect when the car was undergoing an emissions test, how it monitored things like the steering wheel position and speed. If the wheels were spinning but the steering wheel was unmoving like on a lab test machine, it switched the car into test mode. In this mode, the car's emissions system worked perfectly, cutting down NOx to legal levels. But the second the car was back on the actual road, the software reverted to road mode. And in this mode, it spewed out nitrogen oxides at up to 40 times the legal limit. This wasn't a small-time cheat. This software was installed in about 11 million vehicles worldwide, including nearly 600,000 in the United States. So who knew about this? Investigations later revealed that knowledge of the scheme went surprisingly high up the corporate ladder. Emails and memos showed engineers discussing the software, sometimes using code words like acoustic function. Even the CEO, Martin Winterkorn, was briefed on emissions problems in 2014, although he later claimed he had no idea about the fraud itself. The culture at VW was the real culprit. It was a top-down, fear-driven environment. If you missed your targets, you could be demoted or even fired. But if you succeeded, you were rewarded with huge bonuses. The engineers felt trapped. They had to deliver one way or another. With the defeat device in place, Volkswagen rolled out its 2009 Jetta TDI, marketing it as clean diesel. Ads featured happy families, green leaves, and a promise of eco-friendly driving, and it worked. Sales soared. VW's share of the US diesel market jumped from just 5% to over 25%. By 2014, they had sold millions of these cars, all while bragging about their low emissions and great mileage. But some people were getting suspicious. In 2013, a small nonprofit called the International Council on Clean Transportation, or ICCT, commissioned a study. They asked researchers at West Virginia University to test the real-world emissions of a few popular diesel cars, including some from Volkswagen. The results were shocking. On the road, the VWs were emitting 15 to 35 times more NOx than the legal limit. The ICCT shared their findings with the California Air Resources Board and the EPA in 2014 when regulators confronted Volkswagen. The company stonewalled. They blamed technical issues and promised a software update, even recalled 500,000 cars in late 2014, but follow-up tests showed the fix didn't work. In fact, it sometimes made the emissions even worse. Regulators were losing patience. By July 2015, California threatened to block Volkswagen from selling its 2016 models. The walls were closing in. Finally, on September 3, 2015, in a meeting with officials, Volkswagen confessed. They admitted to using the defeat devices. The public bombshell dropped on September 18 when the EPA issued a formal notice of violation. Headlines screamed, "VW cheats on emissions." The company's stock price plunged 20% overnight. A few days later, CEO Martin Winterkorn resigned, offering an apology but denying any personal wrongdoing. The scandal exploded. It turned out the software wasn't just in the Jetta, it was in Passats, Beetles, Audi, A3 South, and even some Porsche Cayenne diesels, affecting models from 2009 all the way to 2015. The aftermath was a corporate apocalypse. Volkswagen initially set aside about $7 billion for fixes, but the final bill soared to over $30 billion in fines, settlements, and car buybacks. In the U.S. alone, a massive settlement in 2016 included buying back affected cars from owners, funding environmental cleanup projects, and investing in zero-emission vehicle technology. Owners each received thousands of dollars in compensation. Globally, 11 million cars were recalled. The legal hammer fell hard. In 2017, Volkswagen as a company pleaded guilty to criminal charges, including fraud and obstruction of justice, and paid a $4.3 billion fine. Executives started facing justice, too. One manager, Oliver Schmidt, was arrested at a Miami airport while on vacation and was later sentenced to 7 years in prison. An engineer who cooperated with investigators got 40 months. In Germany, former CEO Martin Winterkorn was charged with fraud, and his trial is still ongoing. In total, at least 9 executives were indicted. The environmental damage was immense. The fraud is estimated to have added about 1 million extra tons of NOx pollution in the U.S. alone, which has been linked to premature deaths. Volkswagen's reputation was in tatters. But the scandal also served as a catalyst for change. It spurred tighter emissions testing regulations worldwide, including new on-road tests in Europe. And it wasn't just VW. Other automakers like Fiat Chrysler and Mercedes-Benz faced similar investigations, paying out billions in fines themselves. In the years since, Volkswagen has pivoted hard toward electric vehicles, investing tens of billions of dollars with the goal of becoming carbon neutral. But the scar of Dieselgate remains. It's a powerful reminder that cutting corners, especially at this scale, can cost a company everything. Now, let's look at this from a human behavior angle, because that's where the story gets really fascinating. Dieselgate is a perfect example of how a toxic corporate culture and an ends justify the means mindset can completely destroy ethics. Why would brilliant engineers willingly install cheating software? In a very hierarchical organization like Volkswagen, aggressive goals from the top create immense pressure to conform. Employees start to believe that success is more important than following the rules. They rationalize small cheats as being necessary for the greater good of the company. Psychologists call this moral disengagement. It's a way of reframing harmful actions to make them seem acceptable. It's like saying it's just business or everyone else is probably doing it too. There's also something called diffusion of responsibility. When a decision is spread across many teams, departments, and managers, no single person feels fully accountable. The blame gets spread so thin that it almost disappears. The fear of failure in that top-down culture silenced anyone who might have wanted to speak up. It created a groupthink environment where unethical choices became the new normal. These weren't evil people, But ordinary individuals who made a series of small, compromising decisions to avoid being punished or ostracized, their personal morality was slowly chipped away. The CEO's obsession with perfection only made it worse. Miss your target and face his wrath, or cheat quietly and get a promotion. Ultimately, Dieselgate is a stark lesson. When responsibility is diffused and the final goal overshadows the means of getting there, integrity crumbles, and the damage can affect all of us. This scandal isn't just about cars. It's about the very human flaws that can drive us all off course. Thanks for watching, and if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives.